Tonight, Starmer announces his one-in, one-out migrant deal with France. The Prime Minister's describing it as a pilot, with 50 migrants expected to be returned each week. The Conservatives, though, say it won't make any difference, with Reform UK describing it as a humiliation to Brexit Britain. But on the day the deal is done, Sky News witnesses the scale of the challenge as we film a boat this morning heading from a beach near Dunkirk to the UK. Also tonight, Kemi Badenoch tells us about her plan to try and cut the benefits bill. We need to draw a line in the sand, she says. The rules need to get tougher. I'll be speaking to the chair of Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee as they publish a new report that says the threat to people in the UK from Iran has increased significantly. And Donald Trump gives out one of his regular compliments while meeting African leaders, but this time it backfires. We'll explain why. Good day, Harry and Ellie Chowns, tremendous people, very smart, of course, will be with us for the next hour. Best to go with the more generic ones, Donald. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. So a groundbreaking deal with France on migration is signed. There are questions on numbers. We're only talking about 50 people a week, which works out at around one person for every 17 who arrive. But look, in Keir Starmer's defence, he's got a returns agreement with France over the line for the first time. Or has he? Because at the news conference, Emmanuel Macron said the deal had been agreed in principle. What he called the legal verification procedure still needs to be completed, including by the EU. And the formal agreement itself states the deal needs legal scrutiny from both the European Commission and EU member states. I mean, that feels like potentially quite a big deal, because any returns agreement is, of course, highly contentious within the EU. Countries like Italy and Greece are worried that if migrants get sent back to France from the UK, well, the French will then just pass them straight on to them, because they're so often the first country of arrival. Look, it might be fine. Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are obviously very confident. It's expected to start in a few weeks. But if there is any chance of a migrant deal being blocked by the EU, well, that would be a gift to Nigel Farage. Let's get the details then, shall we, of what has been agreed. Here's our political editor, Beth Rigby.
Britain's border force out this morning in the English Channel, intercepting yet another small boat and rescuing the people it's carrying. 79 more illegal migrants landing in Dover in a crisis that seems to have no end. Shortly after these migrants arrived in Britain, this man arrived in Downing Street for an Anglo-French summit with illegal migration top of the agenda. President Macron's the first European leader to come to the UK for a state visit since Brexit, so this is a massive symbolic moment. But today it's all about the politics. The Prime Minister really needs a win on small boats. President Macron, can you do a deal on small boats, sir? What these two leaders have agreed is to trial a limited returns deal where up to 800 migrants a year will be sent back to France. In return, Britain would accept the same number of asylum seekers if they have a legitimate claim. It's expected to cost British taxpayers millions of pounds.
It's a pilot to break the model. That is the whole point of it. It is groundbreaking, and it's no wonder that for years British governments, previous governments, have been trying to secure a deal like this, a returns agreement like this, because all governments have realised just how important it is. And we've now been able to agree it. And we've agreed it because we have cooperated, collaborated through serious diplomacy to get an outcome which is best for both of our countries.
I wouldn't want there to be an idea that we're not doing our job. We're putting in a lot of money to protect our border, and we've cut off the routes. Smugglers are adapting, and we must adapt our response.
The Prime Minister had every right to look pleased today because Brexit cast a long shadow over relations between London and Paris, but with some deft diplomacy, he's turned the page and he's actually got a real policy win here today. Because what he and President Macron have agreed is a real plan to try and create a deterrent to stop small boat crossings. Now, it will start off as a pilot. It will be only a fraction of the people crossing illegally that will be sent back to France, but there is a possibility that he can scale it up and make a real difference. And that really matters because migration is a top 3 voter priority. And if he doesn't fix this problem, it's going to really hurt him at the polls. Because the political threat is real. Polling today finds 4 out of 10 people planning to vote Reform would consider switching to Labour if the number of small boat crossings were reduced.
I don't believe it'll work. I believe the numbers will be very limited indeed. And even if it did work, where's the advantage to us? This is Brexit Britain. We voted to take back control of our borders, not to accept a deal given to us by a French president.
This so-called deal will make no difference whatsoever. 44,000 illegal immigrants have crossed in the last year under Keir Starmer's watch, and his frankly pathetic returns deal will only see a paltry 50 illegal immigrants a week returned to France. That represents only 6% of those arriving.
The PM promised to drive down illegal migration, but a year into power, boat crossings are at a record high at this point of the year. There's a lot riding on today's policy if images like this are to be a thing of the past. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Now let's just get a sense of the scale of the challenge of what the UK and France are trying to tackle. It's worth looking at some of the numbers here. So this here shows that so far this year, there's been a 50% increase in small boat crossings, the line over here, the light blue one, compared to this point in 2024. So there's been over 21,000 small boat crossings in 2025, compared to just over 14,000. That's at the same point last year. And if you go back a few years, if you go back to 2018, it was just 11 at this point in 2018. But how does the number of small boat arrivals compare to legal migration? Because it's worth putting this in context. Because in 2024, there were 36,000 small boat arrivals. And in that time, net migration to the UK was over 700,000. So the level of legal migration was 20 times higher than the number of small boat arrivals. But our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, has been out on the Channel. He witnessed firsthand some of the tactics being used by the smuggling gangs and sent this report.
These are the scenes the British government is desperate to stop. A small boat loaded with dozens of people setting off across the Channel. The French police didn't stop it leaving, but it was shadowed by this search and rescue vessel, here to observe, not obstruct. We follow the boat as it chugs slowly along the coast for an hour. And then it takes a surprise detour back towards the shore. A police vehicle comes to meet it. A helicopter arrives, but the boat never lands. Instead, 4 people, almost certainly part of the smuggling gang that arranged this crossing, jump out and wade back to the shoreline as those left on board resume their journey. The 4 who leapt off are met by the French police, but they're barely questioned, let alone arrested, and within a minute, they've walked off towards the dunes. Behind them, the frail, packed, slow-moving boat is on its way to Britain.
The French authorities are well aware of the progress of this boat. We've seen the police watch it leave the beach. There was a helicopter above, and that search and rescue vessel is monitoring its progress. But they won't intercept it because they're too worried about all of those migrants falling into the water. So unless the boat itself fails, all of those people will be landing in Britain.
We have seen how the smugglers who operate along this coastline are well organised and act fast. French police rarely enter the water, and the smugglers exploit that fact. British politicians have demanded tougher action from France. The French say the UK needs to address the pull factors that attract migrants. So what is it that draws so many people from around the world to make this journey? Many here don't want to talk on camera, but they do see the UK as their best option.
I'm trying to go to Manchester. But let me tell you one thing, yeah, all these people here, any of them when they get to the UK, they will be literally getting the black job. Black job, that means a job where you don't pay any tax or whatever, you just go work illegally. This is what they're going to do.
On this one small boat, Another 50 people to add to the tally of many thousands who have crossed the Channel so far this year. A tide of humanity that is proving very hard to stem. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Dunkirk.
Well, our political editor, Beth Rigby, is on her way back from that joint press conference between Starmer and Macron that we saw there. She joins us now. Beth, what's your take on this deal?
Well, look, Sophie, the first thing to say is that the Prime Minister in that press conference called it groundbreaking, and in some ways it is. This is a deal between France and the UK that they hope will become a deterrent. So under the plan, if someone arrives illegally on a boat, they get sent back to France, and in return, the UK takes an asylum seeker and a migrant that perhaps has connections with the UK and they let them in legally. And what they hope is over time, people understand if you try and get here via this route, you will be sent back. So it's a deterrent. So that is a step change, because up to now, the UK government and Keir Starmer has been focusing on smashing the gangs, as he puts it. He's been focusing on law enforcement, the border force. So look, it is a big moment. It is undoubtedly potentially a game changer, but there's so many caveats in all of that when I say it, because number one, this is only a pilot. We think up to 50 people will be sent back a week. That's what, about 800 by the end of the year. And I think the point of this plan is it only really works if it can be massively scaled up. And can the French and UK governments do that? Point two, President Macron himself said at the press conference it still has to be signed off by the European Union. And we know that there are concerns by some of the Mediterranean 5 countries. They're on the frontier of the border of Europe, taking in many, many migrants. They have been unhappy about this deal. So there are challenges to it, but it was interesting, I think, that the Prime Minister also had to give ground to Macron because he made a point, Macron, in that press conference. He said 30% of the people arriving into Europe, into the European Union borders, are trying to get to the UK. And his argument was we need to stop the pull factors. What makes the UK attractive for migrants to try to come here? And on that, the Prime Minister did him a deal. He said he would crack down on illegal working, and also he talked about digital ID and identification. So there was a sort of give there, if you like, but that also will, of course, go down well domestically anyway. So look, where I would say it's at is that this is a Prime Minister who knows that he has to deliver on this policy. He started to do the border force and try and break up and disrupt the gangs. And now he's got a new tool in his arsenal, if you like, to try and drive down these numbers. But as Rishi Sunak found before him, there is, and the Prime Minister said it himself, no silver bullet to this problem. It requires coordination across the UK and France, around Europe and indeed around the world if the government wants to set up returns agreements with other countries. So it is not an easy problem to solve. It's confounded and infuriated many Prime Minister past, but at least today he has a deal. And if he can visibly show migrants being sent back, well, just like the Conservatives were trying to do with that Rwanda plan, you remember when they were trying to get planes off the ground before a general election, they want to show the public that they are sending people back and trying to do something about this. And on that, he has an opportunity, but I say there is still a hell of a long way to go.
Beth, thank you very much indeed. Beth Rigby, there, our political editor. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The former Downing Street Director of Communications under Boris Johnson, Guto Hari, and the Green Party MP and Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Ellie Chan. It's great to have you both on the show.
Good to be here.
So, Guto, he's managed to do what you guys failed to when you're number 10 then, get a returns agreement with France?
There's a very sound principle here that people who jump the queue by jumping in small boats are denying people with a more legitimate case for being in the UK from getting here. That's a principle that I support. And one of the problems with having a proper immigration policy that allows legitimate people to come here is that you cannot, if the system is swamped by largely young men jumping in boats. So the principle is sound, but I think the scheme is literally the bare minimum that they could get away with today without it being excruciatingly embarrassing. This is a small fraction of the people who turn up every day who face the prospect of going back. It's a temporary scheme, it seems. It's a pilot. If it grows up one day into an adult scheme that's going to stick around for a while and going to actually capture more people, it may become a real deterrent. But at the moment, it feels to me a bit gimmicky, a bit tokenistic. And I remember dealings between Boris Johnson and Macron. He's extremely charming, but he's very, very slippery as well. And I'm not sure the scheme is even off the ground to the extent that, Keir Starmer thinks and says it is tonight.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? There's still the legal verification to go through with the EU, including the member states. Watch this space. Ellie, what do you make of it all? Do you support it? Are you against it? What do you think?
Well, I think to pick up on something Guto was saying about people jumping the queue by getting into small boats. I mean, we've got to face the reality. Why are people getting into boats? It's because they haven't got safe and managed routes to get here. There's no question of jumping the queue because there isn't a queue. There isn't another way to claim asylum unless you're Ukrainian. And of course, we've shown that we can have safe and managed routes, but they're only for certain nationalities, largely Ukrainians. We ought to have a system that provides safe and managed routes for people who are fleeing violence wherever they are in the world. And if we had that, we wouldn't see all of these desperate people getting into these boats for these really, really dangerous journeys. So I think we need to step back from the agreement that's been made today. So there is arguably a safe and managed route for the people who are being exchanged for those that are being sent back. But bizarrely, this tiny route for 50 people a week is going to depend on the deportation of people. So it's going to need people to make dangerous journeys in order for the quid pro quo to work. Why doesn't the government just create the safe and managed routes?
If you are in a UN camp, in a war zone, you can apply there and then to come to the UK, and eventually that thing will be processed. There's no prospect of that happening at the moment because we are, overwhelmed by the number of people coming here, and they are almost invariably young men. Young men. You look at the pictures of that. They're young men getting into the boats, and they're not fleeing a war zone. They're fleeing France. And I would love to hear anyone who's arguing that case argue that they are not safe in France. If anyone wants to make the case that they are in danger sitting there in Calais and therefore need to cross the channel in order to be safe, it's ludicrous. They're already safe. So why? Why are they coming here? And I still don't see why we just can't stop them leaving France rather than go through this shroud of them coming here, and then a small proportion of them, maybe if this thing works today, might just get sent back over the channel.
Ellie. I mean, on that basis, Guto, you'd never accept any refugees here because we happen to be an island. So people always have to go somewhere else before they can get here. I mean, that's frankly a ridiculous argument.
We should be. I'm very pro-migration, but we have taken so many now that it's changing our way of life. We can't cope with them. It's destroying us financially. People are resentful, and our politics is going to be changed beyond recognition.
That's simply not true. As Sophie was saying just a few moments ago, actually, the people who are coming over in boats are 5% less of the total migration numbers. They are people who are fleeing violence. They're from places like Afghanistan, places like South Sudan. They have made journeys from these. And because they haven't had any opportunity to apply for asylum from the places that they've fled from, they've been forced into these incredibly dangerous journeys. Nobody wants them to go through those journeys. Nobody wants smuggling gangs to be making a fortune off the back of them. But the fact is that because we don't have safe and managed routes for people to be able to claim asylum, we're not taking them in. And as for the argument that we're doing our fair share, there's 42.5 million refugees in the world. We are definitely not taking anywhere close to our fair share of the people who are fleeing violence.
Really interesting debate from both of you. I think we've had both sides of the argument here. Guto, before we move on, I want to ask about Emmanuel Macron. You said he was slippery when he was with Boris Johnson.
No, he's very charming.
You
don't forget a handshake from Macron. He goes halfway up your arm. And he looks you in the eyes, and that's as a man. But he's clever. He's very clever, very, very intelligent, but he's also very, very cunning. And there was just something about that press conference that made me think this thing is not remotely, in the shape that it needs to be for it to be a significant deterrent.
OK, watch your space. Thanks both. Have lots more from you both throughout the programme. And of course, migration and that visit from Macron, sure to feature in tomorrow's papers as well. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Deputy Political Editor of The Spectator, James Heal, and the political journalist, Zoe Grunewald. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, Kemi Badenoch warns of a ticking time bomb of spiralling welfare dependency after the government's climb down on benefit reform. Our political correspondent Rob Powell caught up with her after her speech. And I asked Labour's Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, about what he thinks of those controversial welfare changes and whether he'd consider a return to Westminster. You've always got to ask it with Andy. Stay with us. Hello, welcome back. Now, Kemi Badenoch has warned of what she's calling a ticking time bomb on benefits and welfare. The Conservative leader held a speech earlier to go on the attack over the issue after the government's climbed down on welfare reform last week. Now, our political correspondent Rob Powell was at her speech a bit earlier. He joins us now. You also caught up with her, didn't you?
Yeah, and Kemi Badenoch was asked in the little chat they had after this speech whether this was her sort of get on your bike and look for work moment, a reference, of course, to Norman Tebbit saying, Norman Tebbit, of course, died this week. And she said that, yes, in a way, it was. Essentially, she was issuing a warning about the growing level of the disability benefits bill and calling for foreign nationals to be excluded from it, but also calling for a line to be drawn below which, essentially, people wouldn't be eligible. And she gave an idea of where she thought that line should be drawn. She talked about conditions like mild anxiety, mild depression. She also talked about people claiming disability allowance for tennis elbow, getting a free car for having constipation. those sorts of eye-catching kind of claims that often don't check out, although I did have a look at those and they do actually check out. The difficulty I think I have with stuff like this, and I think it goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about on Politics Hub earlier in the week, is that when you take an approach like that, I think that focuses on bringing down the amount you're spending on something, you can sometimes miss out the sort of human side of it and some of the complex cases that maybe fall in the middle as well. So when I spoke to Kemi Badenoch earlier, I wanted to ask about some of the examples that were used in a report that she quoted heavily from the Centre for Social Justice, essentially about people that were able to get more on benefits than by working. And I also wanted to ask about what is, of course, the biggest section of the welfare budget, the state pension. Kemi Badenoch, you talked a lot today about how to bring down the benefits bill, especially the disability benefits bill, and you've talked about a report from the CSJ where we are today. The example they give of someone that could get more in benefits than working is a jobless single parent claiming for anxiety with a child with ADHD. I just sort of wanted to humanise this a little bit. What would you say to someone in a situation like that, where you're saying you may not be able to get benefits anymore? What should they do?
We need to get more people into work. Work provides stability, it provides purpose, it provides connection. I mean, even the NHS has said that work can be a treatment. So helping people back into work is not just good for them, it's also good for society and the economy. And that is our primary goal. When we were in government, we brought the number of workless households right down to record lows. Worklessness creates dependency across generations. We've got to fix that.
But if you're in a single-parent household, you've got a child potentially in school, has ADHD, there's extra demands there. It seems that might be a difficulty, a barrier, a genuine barrier to going into work.
But that's a different problem. What you've described is a different problem.
But that's the example that's set out in this report.
That's the example in the CSJ report. I'm here talking about what we need to do. The welfare budget is getting so high that it's actually stopping those with very significant disabilities from accessing the services. Yes, of course, there will be extreme cases like the ones that you've described.
But you talked about people being able to get more on benefits than working. That's not cited as an extreme example in this report you're quoting.
But that's what we're talking about now is an example. They said £2,500 for someone on disability and sickness benefits. When we were in government, we managed to fix the issue so that there was a cap so that no one on out-of-work benefits would earn more than those who were in work. What's happened is that we're seeing people change from trying to get out-of-work benefits to health and disability benefits.
A little earlier, I asked you about the biggest part of the welfare budget, the state pension, and whether the triple lock was sustainable and whether it needed to be reviewed and looked at. And you said we need to look where the money goes. What do you mean by that? That seems to hark back to maybe looking at means testing the state pension and it not being as universal as it is now.
The triple lock is a Conservative policy. That's not something I'm changing. We are talking about working age benefits.
But is it sustainable? You're saying working age benefits are unsustainable. Is the triple lock sustainable, given the OBR have said it isn't?
We cannot fix defence, pensions, unless we start with welfare. That's where we have to start. Talking about all the other things we can look at without fixing welfare is a huge problem. This is an easy area to fix, and we have a Labour government that is not even looking at the easiest area.
I guess when a bigger slice of the pie and a slice of the welfare budget that is growing really fast, that many people, many economists, the OBR say will be unsustainable in the long term, the state pension being pushed up by the triple lock, why are you not looking there for potential savings as well? Why are you quite relaxed about that?
Because, as I've said, the first place to fix this problem is out-of-work benefits, health and disability. If we get more people into work, we will have more money for all of these other things, whether it's pensions, defence, education.
And just finally, we saw Jake Berry say that he's going to reform. I think you suggested in an answer to a question earlier that there might be a bit of opportunism in there, people sort of following the latest political fad. Is that what you think is going on here? Is that what Jake Berry's doing?
I am making the Conservative Party properly conservative. I've changed our policy on net zero. I've toughened up our immigration policy. I'm talking today about bringing the welfare budget down. If people want to leave the Conservative Party for a party of more welfare, like reform, that means that they were not Conservatives.
What do you make of it all, Rob?
The triple lock stuff really interests me because you had an OBR report this week essentially saying that in the long run it's completely unsustainable. Kemi Badenoch's premise in this speech was I'm a politician that will tell the truth. We need to live within our means in application to disability benefits. But when it comes to the triple lock and the state pension, it was interesting. The initial answer she gave me in the press conference when I asked her about it and said, look, in the spirit of telling the truth, will you say that this needs to be looked at? The first thing she said was, we need to look at where the money is going. And when I questioned her there about it, she seemed to run a mile from the idea of it. Look, when the IFS say the retirement age will need to be raised to 74 in the next 11 years if we're going to carry on affording the triple lock. The OBR say it's unsustainable. And you know what? I think Kemi Badenoch thinks all of that as well. Given everything she's said in the past about, spending and benefits being a function of tax being a burden on business, it having a cost somewhere, I really do think that she thinks that. Of course, she won't say it, though, because, I guess to paraphrase a famous political TV show, the triple lock's the third rail of British politics, and if you touch it, you die.
Very good, Rob. Thank you very much indeed. Good to Ellie here as well. Ellie, what do you make of Rob's interview and some of those points he was making?
Well, I thought Kemi Badenoch was really weak, actually, responding to your questions, Rob. And I think you're really right to point out that actually the benefits bill is not just about working age benefits, and it's not just about health and disability benefits. I think I'm right in saying that 55% of the benefits bill goes to people of retirement age. The vast bulk of that is the state pension, and it's twice as much as goes on working age health and disability benefits. So yes, if you've got politicians that are serious about looking at where the money goes, then we do need to talk about the full benefits bill.
Would you get rid of the triple lock?
Pardon?
Would you get rid of the triple lock?
Well, I do think we need to have a proper conversation about it, because what we see is that certain parts of the benefits bill are protected with the triple lock, but others are not. And so disabled people, for example, are getting poorer and poorer. We've had information just recently from the Trussell Trust saying that the money that people are given to live on is way less than the actual cost of living. So we've got a fundamental problem of inequality in our society.
Yeah, good to what just to bring in as well.
Classic game theory. Nobody wants to abandon the triple lock because the person who says what is a no-brainer, that it's unsustainable. Frankly, we're living longer, so you've got to make the same amount of money last for longer, which means it should be at a lower level. Or you've got to start it much later. And 74, I think most people would rather have a little less at 65 than, a little more at 74.
You don't fancy working till you're 74?
But, well, I probably do, actually. I work till I drop. But the problem is, in game theory, nobody wants to say this because the competitive advantage goes to the person who doesn't say it. That nasty bunch of Tories or that nasty bunch of Labour. There's a minister in this Labour government who described, and actually he's in the relevant department, I think, who described the triple lock as insane or whatever, because it just, whatever else is happening in the world, however tough life is for many people, whatever the needs of defence or whatever when Putin is on the rampage, the one given is that every year pensioners will get this extra bung that is bigger than virtually anyone else, and that doesn't make sense. And the welfare bill overall, for me, 300 billion, it cannot be what we decide to spend more on than anything else. But that is the reality today, and that is going to shaft us.
So the triple lock was introduced at a time that pensioner poverty was a huge, huge problem, and it has actually been effective at reducing that. We still do have pensioner poverty, so it's not like we can say, oh, well, just chuck it out altogether, everybody's absolutely fine. That's not the case. But we have a huge problem of poverty among young people, among families as well, among children, exactly, two-child benefit cap. We need to have a proper conversation about this, and we've got a government that's saying there's no money available when actually they've got plenty of options. They could tax wealth fairly. They could consider a wealth tax on assets over 10 million, which is what the Green Party's been proposing for a long time. They could equalise capital gains tax with income tax. There are many measures that they could take to raise more revenue in order to support the public services and the support for people that we need. Yeah. The other thing that I'd just like to say about what Kemi Badenoch's been proposing today is, I mean, it's classic dog whistle politics, the xenophobic aspect of it. Oh, it's all the foreigners that are the problem with our benefits bill is effectively the headline that she's chasing. That's just completely wrong.
Okay. Rob, I'm interested, because obviously you spent some time with Kemi Badenoch today. How did she seem? What did she seem kind of confident, or she's had a bit of a battering, hasn't she?
Yeah, I think she's interesting to observe in situations like this, because I'm not convinced that these sorts of set-piece speeches are her kind of natural habitat. I find she always has something kind of interesting to say, which is why I was a little bit surprised about some of the sort of low-hanging fruit things of, well, there's people getting free cars for constipation and things like that, because when she starts talking about actually the need to reform various bits of the welfare budget and disability allowance, and whether it really is doing now what it was intended to be when it was proposed, then it's quite interesting. But you sort of feel that she's taken some of that, and then lots of people have said, no, but you need to put in this on top of it.
What do you mean you want to get rid of the triple lock?
But yeah, I mean, the triple lock thing's interesting because within minutes of her saying not ruling out reviewing the triple lock, a press release and a response had come through both from Labour and the Lib Dems saying that Kemi Badenoch has put pensioners on notice, which is exactly Guto's point, that you can't talk about it because everyone else piles in. Someone's going to have to eventually.
It would be so refreshing if people said, OK, there's a whole load of things that nobody wants to do, but we can't not do any of them. Because if we don't do any of them, then we actually have to raise taxes or we have to borrow more, and then the nasty men and women in the city will actually, you know, do to us what they did to Liz Truss. So there have to be some tough choices, and people have got to join the dots.
And bravery from politicians as well, right? To go out and make the argument, say, look, these are tough things to do, but we've got to
And I think it's
an
interesting thing she's put the Conservatives there today, because Nigel Farage, I think, is a big slip from him to suggest spending more on welfare. There is an opening now where the Conservative Party can go back to being the party that is more fiscally responsible than others.
Just briefly, so...
Yeah, I mean, another issue that's been a political football for far too long and needs a proper grown-up conversation is social care, reforming social care.
Oh my goodness, that's
you know, electoral poison basically for 20 years.
Yeah, it's absolutely
And Baroness
right.
Casey still, you know, we're getting nowhere with that. I've been basically chasing Wes Streeting for the cross-party talks long promised.
Yeah.
We're seeing nothing of them.
Yeah, social care is...
We've got to sit down and find the political will to resolve these difficult issues.
Thanks all very much indeed. Well, of course, the biggest blow to the Labour Party's welfare plans came from within the party itself this week, when Keir Starmer was forced to U-turn after a rebellion from Labour MPs. And outside of Westminster, the Labour Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, also expressed his concerns about the government's plans. I've been speaking to him about that, and also the other issue he's been vocal on this week and previously, the infected blood scandal. Thank you so much for being on the programme. Always good to talk to you. You've obviously been a very strong campaigner on the infected blood scandal, so I just wanted to get your reaction to the latest report.
Well, I am, like so many people, in the debt of Sir Brian, who continues to be a fearless advocate for the infected blood community. But it's sad that he has to do it. You know, it's so sad that we're in this situation. I was at a meeting recently in Westminster of the all-party parliamentary group, and just to hear the anguish in people's voices about why are we still in this position, honestly, how do you answer that question? They shouldn't be in this position. And the British state has really got to look itself in the mirror here. You know, it's failing on every level. It fails with the original response to the disaster, as it does in so many similar situations, but then fails to bring accountability and recompense, and it kind of constantly, you know, is pushing people out, pushing people into the wilderness. It's so wrong on so many levels. It really needs to be urgently gripped and fixed.
I agree with you so much on this appalling injustice, and some of the individual stories really do just break your heart. What do you think it is about the state that means that the first reaction isn't to try and help people or to admit wrongdoing, it's almost to cover up?
Yes, and you know, we've seen that, haven't we? Not just with infected blood, but with the post office. It's more than just cover up. It's to deflect blame onto those who've been injured and wronged. You know, the postmasters and mistresses are thieves, or the Liverpool fans were late and ticketless. Or in the case of people in the infected blood community, that some people brought it on themselves through their lifestyle. I mean, it's just so wrong. But then when it comes to a point where supposedly things are being put right, it's as if the state still can't see the people at the heart of things, and they go straight to processes and structures that kind of miss the point. In this case, you know, I have people here in Greater Manchester, friends who I've known for many years, who I've campaigned for on this issue, saying, you know, why did they not prioritise people according to the level of harm and the time that they've got left? I mean, that you would think that's such a straightforward thing. But also the concern was expressed about the division that was created between the HIV community and the hepatitis C community and differential standards applying. I mean, on every level, it just lost sight so quickly of what this was all about. But I do plead with ministers. You know, we've heard Sir Brian. I heard the right response from ministers, but please, please now fix this and fix it as soon as possible.
I wanted to ask about Hillsborough there. You mentioned the other cover-ups that we've seen. And of course, you first introduced the Hillsborough law in the House of Commons, which is all about trying to help prevent cover-ups in the future. The Prime Minister did promise to pass this law, but he hasn't done it yet. Do they need to get a move on?
Well, obviously we want the law to be the right law. We want it to be the real Hillsborough law. And that means the law or the bill that I introduced to Parliament all of those years ago. You are right to say, Sophie, it is too easy to cover up in this country, and it's too hard for ordinary people to fight for justice and accountability. And the Hillsborough law corrects those things. And there are two things at its heart. You know, I see all of the emphasis people put on the duty of candour, and rightly so, because it's such an important measure that people would be required to tell the truth at the first time of asking. And in my experience as a minister, you know, that is a crucial reform, because sometimes the Treasury says in these situations, oh, there must be no admission of liability. And over time, that becomes half-truths and statements that are, you know, as I say, you know, not correct. So that duty of candour is absolutely crucial. But the Hillsborough law always had an equally important second plank, and that was parity of legal funding at inquests where the state is involved, parity of funding for bereaved families. Because the reality of the experience for many bereaved families is, raw with grief, they find themselves in courtrooms up against the highest paid KCs in the land, because public bodies often spare no expense in showering public money around like confetti, hiring the best KCs, when often bereaved families have no one to represent them at all, and they're scratching around for their legal representation. That's what happened to the Hillsborough families all of those decades ago. And the false narratives sometimes that get set in the aftermath of these situations then get cemented in courtrooms because there's not an even playing field. That's why the two things are crucial here: duty of candour, parity of legal funding. That is the full Hillsborough law. And I say to everybody in government, we need the full Hillsborough law, the real Hillsborough law. That's what people are waiting for.
You're seen often as one of the, I guess, kind of deeper thinkers, if you like, in the Labour movement. So I was just wondering to get your opinion on the big problems, of course, that the current government is facing now. When you look at the fiscal position, when you look at the difficulty in getting further savings through, the fact that she's bumping up against her fiscal rules when it comes to borrowing. Is the Chancellor going to be forced, do you think, to put up taxes in the autumn? And should she put up taxes?
Well, I've been arguing in the last couple of days that there's a good version of benefit reform that I believe goes with the grain and people can get behind. The system really doesn't work for people. It's a very negative, distrustful system. People fear interacting with the system. They think it's designed to trip them up rather than help them out. So how does a system that people perceive to be like that get people into work? Well, it doesn't, does it? And that explains the significant failure rate. We believe devolution of employment support, building a different system from the bottom up that is more positive, more empowering, actually will move people in the right direction and deal with some of the other issues going on in their lives that are things you have to deal with first before you can support them towards work. So housing concerns, personal debt issues, mental health issues that need to be addressed as well. You know, the system we've got is just a narrow tick box, computer says no system. And unsurprisingly, it doesn't work.
You on taxes specifically, you wrote in The Guardian talking about as clear as the case is for some form of wealth taxation. So I just wanted to kind of pin you down a bit. Does that mean you are in favour of a wealth tax?
Well, there's a clear case for one. If you just look at council tax alone, it hasn't been revalued for, what, 3 decades now. So there are people in massive houses who pay lower council tax than many of the residents here in Greater Manchester. So there are clearly anomalies in the system, and there is a case for some form of wealth tax. But what I was arguing yesterday was actually there's also a version of reform that can work along the lines that I was just describing, but particularly what I was saying...
just specifically on the wealth tax...
The biggest thing you could do...
You're mentioning there... Sorry, you're mentioning there about council tax reform, but do you like the idea of like a kind of 2% tax on assets over 10 million or whatever it is, that something your party have described? Is that the kind of thing that appeals to you?
Well, I mean, if you just look at the way society has changed in the last few decades, the extremes of wealth are huge now, aren't there? As I said to you, there is a case, and there's a very solidly based case on the fact that some people are paying a lower percentage in tax than they were a few years ago. But I wanted to come back to the point about a good version of reform in the benefit system. Rather than going straight to cuts to support, as Whitehall does, I've been saying, look, go to bricks and mortar. The housing crisis in this country inflates the benefit bill by billions as well. And that is something the government could really kind of get to grips with. If you brought forward the biggest council house building programme in this country since the Second World War, that is a route to reduce the benefits bill. And that's the clear evidence that the National Housing Federation have put forward. You know, if you build something like 90,000 homes, council homes for social rent, you can reduce the benefit bill by over £3 billion, not just because you're not paying inflated rents in the private rented sector through the benefit system, you're also giving the platform of a good home for people, which itself helps people towards work. So I am making the argument to the government, you know, the 39 billion that they allocated at the spending review for housing, focus all of it, I would say, on council homes and social homes. You know, that's where the biggest return can come over the years in terms of the benefit system.
We are out of time, but I just want to ask finally, Oasis back in Manchester. Have you got tickets?
We're all dusting off our bucket hats, and yes, I've bought my ticket, and we'll be going tomorrow. Now, it's going to be a great weekend in the city, to be honest. You know, we just launched our new 10-year strategy yesterday. We're thinking big, as we always do here, Sophie. We've got big plans for growth in the next decade, but we've also been saying, look, if this city's to carry on growing in the way that it is, we're going to have to build an underground system here to support what is becoming a second city like you would see elsewhere in the world. You know, that means all of the infrastructure that a second city like ours needs. And you know, we celebrate that ambition, as well as in the moment this big reunion that's coming our way. So Manchester's in a moment, we're in another good moment, and we're going to have a great weekend.
You're talking about your kind of big plans for Manchester, but you've also, of course, been talking about some of your big political ideas that would work nationally as well. I just wonder, you know, are there any other guys from Manchester plotting a comeback?
I don't know, who have you got in mind?
Are you going to come back to Westminster?
So energised by what we're doing here. It's a great place to be right now. I think this is where the new ideas are, actually, in this country at the moment. I think it's where the energy is. It's where the growth is, to be honest. So why would you want to be anywhere else than sunny Manchester right now, as we look forward to a big weekend with our bucket hats on? I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, anywhere in the world, Sophie, than right here, right now, in Manchester.
Thank you very much indeed, Andy Burnham. My interview there with Andy Burnham. Now, there has been a stark warning today that the threat of physical attacks by Iran on people living in the UK has increased significantly in the last few years. Parliament's intelligence watchdog described the danger from the nation as persistent, unpredictable, and said it shouldn't be underestimated. And the Iranian embassy is now calling the report's claims unfounded. Well, I've been speaking to Lord Beamish, the chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee. Here's what he had to say. Thank you for being on the programme. It's great to have you here. What in particular would you highlight from the report today? What's the key message?
I think the key message is that Iran is both a widespread, persistent and high-risk threat to the UK's security, not just in terms of big geopolitical things around the nuclear programme. But here at home, in terms of threats to individuals who are distant, the Jewish community, Israeli assets here, and the threat we've got from cyber attacks as well.
So like a different kind of threat. When you talk about the threat to individuals, do you mean by kind of lone actors or anything more coordinated?
Well, no, it's far more organised than that.
Yeah.
It's they have a high risk capability, the Iranians, including hiring and working with organised crime criminals to attack individuals' properties and anyone who's really critical of the regime. Which, if you look across Europe, for example, 4 people in the last few years have been killed, not directly by Iranian agents, but by organised crime gangs related to Iran.
You say in the report today that the threat posed by Iran is broadly comparable to that from Russia. Would you can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think in terms of the physical attacks that we've seen on property and individuals, yes, it's perhaps more so. I think in terms of espionage, cyber, and also the propaganda in terms of trying to attack the just way of life we have here. It's a whole suite of threats.
And then I'm interested to get your take on how the government is in all this as well. You say in the report the government appears to overcomplicate its structures and strategies. Too much resource goes into talking and coordinating at the expense of frontline action. What do you mean by that?
Well, our report finished in 2003, so 2023, so this is looking backwards. But what we found was there was a lot of reaction to events rather than planning a long-term strategy against the threat. And the present government will have to respond to our report. What we're hoping to see is not only a more joined-up approach across government, but also it leading to action plans to, take on this threat, rather than what seemed to be is a lot of very complex wiring diagrams of people talking about things rather than doing it.
Do you think that there's any change that you've seen with Keir Starmer, or do you think that perhaps they are also, too much talking and not enough action?
Well, no, I think he's committed. And I think we should also give credit to our security services who've stopped, in the UK and something like 20 attempts on people's lives and potential kidnappings in the last 3 years. So that shows that they're on top of this, but it is a very difficult threat to challenge.
I also just want to touch on the role of the US in all this. You say that since the United States withdrew from the Iranian nuclear deal, the nuclear threat from Iran has increased. So are you effectively saying that, Donald Trump's foreign policy has directly made the threat from Iran to the UK worse?
No, I mean, the UK's position was very clear with allies about we should negotiate and have the JCPOA, but with the Americans withdrawing, it didn't lead to necessarily an increase, but what it did mean that we had a situation whereby there was no negotiation, no constraint until recent, obviously, the attacks on Iran in terms of their nuclear programme. They were very capable of moving from a very initial stage of developing that process very quickly. And that clearly is indicative of what's happened recently.
You mentioned there the attacks, the US attacks on Iran or on their nuclear programme. Do you welcome those strikes?
Well, that's the matter of the United States, but I think the important thing is what next, because this hasn't changed the central theme, which is which says in the report, the Iranian regime wishes to protect itself, keep its distance in line, threaten its neighbours. That has been degraded, no doubt about it, over the last few months. But the overall strategy of Iran is still there. That hasn't changed.
OK, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, you might have picked up on just how much Donald Trump loves to describe things as beautiful. We've had the great big beautiful bill, of course, the beautiful wall along the Mexican border, and he even praised Keir Starmer's beautiful accent, I should say. But the use of his favourite adjective all went a bit wrong when he praised the Liberian president's beautiful command of English, which is the country's official language.
And we just want to thank you so much for this opportunity. Well, thank you. It's such good English, such beautiful. Where did you learn to speak so beautifully? Where were you educated? Where?
Yes, sir.
In Liberia.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's very interesting. It's beautiful English.
Sure.
I have people at this table can't speak nearly as well.
Oh, it's just I don't know what to say. Everyone around the table, no one quite wants to sort of say anything as well. It's just like, oh my goodness. I just don't even know what to say.
I mean, it was
a beautiful moment. It was a beautiful moment.
Perhaps not for the Liberian president. I mean, honestly, it's just ridiculous. It shows how little Donald Trump knows about the history of his own country.
But just the reaction of him as well, when he's like, would you let it in Liberia? Sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but it is quite funny. I mean, have you ever witnessed any of those kind of state occasions going horribly wrong?
With some of the people I've worked with.
Yeah, I can imagine.
There have been sort of awkward moments. I can't think of a specific one now, but it's inevitable in a situation like that. There are some sort of things that can go a little awkward, but that ends up being quite a sweet moment in a way. It's definitely a win for the Liberian president. He leaves there sort of, on the moral high ground, and Trump, for once, he's not even tried to humiliate someone. He's ended up just sort of humiliating himself.
Exactly.
It doesn't happen very often. It's usually throwing stuff, isn't he?
Yeah.
Well, he has got form for awkward interactions, hasn't he? I mean, I remember the hand-holding incident with Theresa May. There's definitely been a number of somewhat cringeworthy.
Yeah, what is it with these kind of long handshakes? I mean, it's like you were saying with Macron as well, the one with him and Keir Starmer, like this week, when they were just gripping each other for... It feels like it's some kind of macho power play, I don't know.
In fairness, though, I think when you're surrounded by hundreds of cameras and, they're all trying to take the same photo, true. So there is a kind of slight unreality about it.
Yeah, that is true.
I was in a room a long time ago with Boris Johnson and Arnie Schwarzenegger, who, having been mayor of California, came over to see Boris Johnson's environmental policies in London, the Cycle High scheme in particular. And when Boris met Arnie, was a moment of high comedy. And Boris had this trap in mind. Who's the governor of California now? Jerry Brown. Wasn't he the governor before? Yes, he came back. Do you think you might? Of course. We all knew what happened. Arnie Schwarzenegger manned up and he said, OK, I'm going to do this. I'll be back. I invented the line. And I just thought, wow, what just happened?
I can imagine that's a reaction. Really great to have you both on the programme today. Wide range of topics, as always, on the Politics Hub. Really good to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Well, that is it for us tonight. I'll see you next Monday at 7 p.m. Lots, I'm sure, to come over the weekend as well. And up next, of course, you've got the UK Tonight with Matt Barbette. And then at 9 p.m, you've got The World with Yada Hakeem. But I will see you next Monday. Have a great Friday and then a great weekend as well.